This is a special privilege, really, for us to be working with the USAID-funded program that the Discovery Channel, the Global Education Partnership, and the Africa Society is working. We are not unaccustomed to dealing with the Africa Society. Our relationship goes back to 2000, where we had a very distinguished program, which Andy participated in, as a matter of fact, at the first national summit. We're going to keep our remarks as brief as possible this afternoon, because we want to have time for questions from all of you. I know you'll have some of those, given the panel that we have here for you this afternoon. Let me just begin by introducing the CEO of the Africa Society. Bernadette Paulo is again an old friend of ours. She is a Renaissance woman. She has been a teacher of English at the secondary school, at the university level. She's an attorney. She spent 12 years on Capitol Hill working in the Congress, where she did things like speech writing, arbitration, the investigation of various criminal acts about some of her colleagues, and she was also auditing elections around the world. So she's a very special person. She worked for many years with Leonard Robinson, the founder of this organization, who all of us knew and respected, and whose spirit is really with us here tonight. Bernadette, I wonder if you could just take the podium and introduce your colleagues.
Thank you. Good evening to all of our special guests and educators, and we have the highest educator, the state superintendent, and honorables, Andy Young, and honorary councils, and Dr. Helene Gale, and certainly John Donaldson from the World Bank. We're very pleased to have you, but this evening belongs to all of you who are educators, superintendents, principals, and teachers. That's why we're here today. You know, I have to tell you, I associate Atlanta with success, because 11 years ago, I came to Atlanta and worked out of Good Works during the National Summit on Africa for the first ever Southeast Regional Summit. And there I had the pleasure to work with Ambassador Young. We were planning for 500 people, Leonard and I, and Mac DeShazer, and our former board chair, Herschel Challenor, in this audience, and now Mayor Shirley Franklin helped us, and we had over 5,000. That's how it started here in Atlanta. And it went on to be the largest mobilization in the history of the United States of America, but it all started here. And I'm here to tell you that we're launching another movement tonight. It's a movement to make sure that the negative images and the ignorance that are presently in our schools and in our society vis-a-vis Africa are shattered once and for all. But before I talk to you about Teach Africa and exactly what it is about, I want to thank Peter and Julia White and Dr. Sussman and Heather and Nancy and all the people who helped put this together. I'm here with two of my colleagues. Almost all of our colleagues represent African countries, and Martha Hiley is here from Eritrea. Martha, can you raise your hand? One of the hardest working people I know. Stand up, Martha. And Dr. Philip Effiong, who you'll be hearing from. But there are people from Atlanta who I have to talk about. You know, Davidian Myers Kelly was on our board. And every time we had a board meeting, she'd say, you need to bring Teach Africa to Atlanta. And Leon Kelly, her husband, is here. And I know Davidian, and she's flying around somewhere. Leon, we brought Teach Africa to Atlanta. So thank you for coming. Please stand. And before we get on to the actual program itself, I also want to recognize Maceo Williams and Vince Farley and all of those from the Georgia Africa Society who are in this audience. we hope to resume the Georgia-Africa Society, even though Davidian has passed. As I indicated to you, the Africa Society is an outgrowth of the National Summit on Africa. And my colleague Leonard Robinson, our founder, passed away 2 years ago. And I worked with him for 10 years and is now I'm at the helm. As I travel around this country and ask young people to give me 4 words that they think of when they hear the word Africa, I can always guess 3 out of 4 of them, and that is animals, war, poverty, and sometimes they don't know chaos, so they'll say mess. And I'm pleased to tell you that Teach Africa has broken records. We had 2,000 students in Pittsburgh for the 3rd phase, marking the largest gathering ever of students behind Africa. We had 1,200 at the State Department. It was opened by Colin Powell in 2004. And we were also in Portland in the Bay Area. We started out in Houston 2 weeks ago, and after this first phase, State Senator Rodney Ellis introduced in the Senate Teach Africa legislation to make sure that there's funding for a new curriculum in Texas behind Africa. So this program basically consists of the following. This is phase 1, where those of you who are educators come in contact with people who make their living working in different sectors so that we know that teaching about Africa is not relegated solely to social studies. And so we have Dr. Helene Gale here who will talk about health, because we share issues of health both in Africa and in the United States. And we'll have John Donaldson talking about the economic sector because, you know, now the United States increasingly needs Africa. Ask the Chinese. Everyone's looking to Africa because there's increasingly more trade with Africa and more resources, and it's in our national security interest. So the first phase, all of you are together. We want to energize you and engage you. And the second phase is to actually train teachers. We've been doing this with the Southern Center for International Studies, and to date we've trained over 1,100 teachers using their materials across this country. The third phase is a youth forum where students who've been trained by these teachers come together for a one-day African immersion program, and that program shows them they get to interact via satellite with their counterparts. Last time it was in South Africa, and with professionals from all over every sector who work on Africa. And we're trying to teach them how they can change the world and have a positive impact. I want to ask my colleague, Dr. Effion, just to tell you next about why this matters from an African perspective and not from an American perspective. But before I go, I just want to say one thing to those of you who are educators. The future of these young people happens to be in your hands. It's not only in their best interest to learn about people's cultures, their economies, their countries. It's also in our best interest for them to do so. And so we can challenge our young people for greatness. And we all collectively hope to arm you with materials to do that. Dr. Effiong is our Director of Research at the Africa Society. He has a PhD from the University of Wisconsin. In literature. He has written a number of books that target African and African American issues, and many articles. We are proud to have him in our midst, Dr. Philip Effiong.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Africa Society is indeed determined to carry out and sustain one of the important goals of the National Summit on Africa, which is to educate and re-educate Americans about Africa and also provide a fresh and balanced understanding of the continent and its peoples. This goal is of tremendous importance to me as an African and as an educator myself, especially since I benefited from an education that exposed me to several parts of the world, including Europe, America, Central America, Asia, the Caribbean, and several countries on the continent of Africa. I cannot even begin to express how this exposure has strengthened my respect for diverse cultures and diverse nationalities, and improved my awareness and appreciation of the beauty of all of humanity. Now let's face it, if we're truly going to have a peaceful world where we live in harmony, we must make some effort to research and understand each other, our values, our histories, and our cultures. Otherwise, our understanding of each other will, for the most part, be marked and defined by stereotypes and misconceptions. More than ever before, the time is pertinent right now for educators and students to have a global perspective on a number of issues, since our world is increasingly becoming a global village. As educators, we are obligated to provide our students with a comprehensive view of the world. If we don't do that, we will be doing them a disfavor. One of my key roles in the Africa Society is to research information, especially unfamiliar information about Africa, so as to strengthen knowledge about the continent and to celebrate the continent. For our educators who are here, I encourage you to also start to pay some attention to Africa, perhaps more attention than you've been paying thus far, especially in areas that you're not familiar with. Even though, for the most part, we are talking about Africa here, it is also my hope that when you begin to explore Africa, that you will also be inspired to explore other regions of the world as well as the lifestyles of other people. It is also my hope that such exploration will ultimately constitute a significant part of your curriculum. Thank you very much.
I am very proud to introduce you to Dr. Gail Ifshin, who's the Executive Director of the Discovery Channel Global Education Partnership. One of the ways that we're changing public opinion is through film and by educating the media. Gail has led this organization since 1997, and her vision to use television to increase access to education and information in underserved communities was far ahead of her time. It's resulted in young people being educated in the most rural areas in countries around the globe. She has developed this grassroots technology, and it's not only educating young people, it's educating whole communities through the use of television and the expansive library of Discovery. We've worked together for over 2 years, and what's new about Teach Africa is, after 10 years with the National Summit on Africa and the Africa Society, this is the first time we ever had any money from USAID. It took 3 years, and they're funding just this first phase, but we're hoping that they'll fund the next. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Dr. Gail Ifshin.
Good evening. Thanks, Bernadette. And I would also like to thank the Southern Center and our partners, the Africa Society, USAID, and Discovery, of course, for making this evening possible. I really love to come to Teach Africa events, and the main reason is that I so deeply believe in the goal of this program, the goals of this program. And usually, Bernadette says, and I'm going to quote you here because I love it when she expresses the ambition of Teach Africa. And tell me if I say it, all right, Bernadette, but the ambition is to create a nationwide movement. Okay, this is not just for Atlanta, it's not just for Portland, a nationwide movement around teaching about Africa. So USAID also has an ambitious goal, an ambitious mission, and their goal through the Africa Education Initiative is to improve the learning environment for over 13 million children in Africa. And finally, Discovery Channel Global Education Partnership has an ambitious mission, and Bernadette said something about it a second ago, and that is to use the power of the medium of television to increase access to information for communities in under-resourced parts of the world, but also, and almost more importantly, to provide a powerful tool for teachers in under-resourced classrooms to be able to increase their effectiveness and to increase the learning gains of students in their classrooms. So we've created this unique partnership between the Africa Society, USAID, and the Global Education Partnership, specifically to pool our expertise and our resources and make an effort to improve education about Africa in the United States. I'd like to quickly give you a little bit of background about the Global Education Partnership. We're a nonprofit organization that was launched, spearheaded by Discovery Communications in 1997. And the goal at that time is pretty much the same as our goal right now. It was to look for a way to maximize the power of video, okay, in communities and classrooms around the world where learning materials may be scarce. You know, the medium of television has a lot of attributes that are unique to it, including its accessibility. It can speak your own language. You can reversion and create programming specifically for specific audiences in specific countries. It can speak your language. It can communicate, you know, complicated information in a consistent way. There are lots of benefits to it, and it's an underutilized resource in the developing world. So we're doing something about that, although we do it in collaboration with the educators we work with in every country. We don't just go into Discovery's library and pull something as it is and distribute it to communities in Africa and elsewhere. We work with educators to make sure that we're providing the kind of information that they most need. So Discovery is one of our major global partners. We have three. The second is Chevron, and the third is the Coca-Cola Africa Foundation. And with their help, the Global Education Partnership is today working in 16 countries around the world, reaching about 600,000 students. Now, usually at this point, I would show you a video. I would show you, of course, I would show you a 3-minute video that in 3 minutes would take you into Africa, would show you not only our work, but take you into the life of a 13-year-old student there named Franji, who lives in Limpopo province in South Africa. And it would show you more than I could tell you if I spoke all night, which I'm not going to do. But as I was thinking about not being able to show it here, it also, you know, it also occurred to me that it sort of proves my point about the use of video. It's very difficult to describe a volcano to a classroom. It's very difficult to teach about biology when you can't take your class into the microscopic world, which is something that is possible through video. All right, so just to kind of conclude and pull things together, Africa Society, the Global Education Partnership, and USAID are putting our experience into creating a lasting educational resource for teachers both in the United States and in Africa. Right now, we're cooperating in an exchange. Students and teachers from LA are visiting their counterparts in Uganda at one of the Global Education Partnership project sites. They're participating in a discussion. They're sharing information. They're sharing perceptions and misperceptions that they may have about one another, and really looking critically at the way Africa is taught in the United States. We hear from the participants that it's an amazing experience for them. But for those of us who are unable to go to Uganda and be part of that discussion, we are filming that exchange. And that exchange is going to inform a 60-minute educational program. Now, how is that program being made? The program is about Africa. It has an African producer and an African production company, of course, right? Because it is about Africa. What's unique, a couple of the unique aspects, though, of producing this program is the following. We are creating an educational tool from the African perspective, and we are also creating And we're creating the tool, I'm sorry, for use from an African perspective, but we're making it for use on both continents. That is a unique element involved here. And the goal is to develop a lasting educational tool for use by teachers here and in Africa that is dynamic and up to date. So I'd just like to finish by thanking you so very much for coming here tonight, and as Bernadette says, for becoming part of a nationwide movement to teach about Africa. Thank you.
There are a few among us who are more qualified to talk about the subject at hand than former Ambassador Andy Young. This is a man, of course, known to all of us. He has his three terms in the Congress. He was the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. He was the co-chairman of the Olympic Quest for the Olympics here in Atlanta. He's a man who's traveled widely on that continent, is well respected there and here. Andy, the podium is yours.
Thanks a lot, Peter, and tell Julie we missed her. And if she'd been here, we'd have had a cool breeze blowing through here by now. But Africa matters because Africa is. Africa is a gigantic place. Africa is 3 times the size of the United States of America. And we can't do without Africa. Africa, I fought with Delta Airlines for 20 years to fly to Africa, and they didn't see any sense in it. The 2 most profitable routes on Delta right now are the daily flight to Johannesburg and the daily flight to Lagos. Africa is wealth. Africa, I say, is the missing link in the global economy. The Chinese know it's there, and they're pouring billions of dollars into Africa. The Arabs know it's there, and they're pouring billions of dollars into Africa. But you know who else is pouring billions of dollars into Africa? More than the Chinese, more than the Arabs, and more than the oil companies, Africans themselves. Nigerians in the United States of America sent back $8 billion to Nigeria last year. Ghanaians sent back $3 billion. And the World Bank will probably have more accurate figures. But the oil company investment in Nigeria was not $8 billion last year, even though they built an oil platform that's 3 football fields in size in Korea, floated it all the way around through the Indian Ocean, and anchored it 20 miles off Port Harcourt. It's probably in itself a $2.5 to $3 billion investment. Oil companies don't put that kind of investment someplace where they don't expect to be for the next 100 years. And so because of the essential presence of Africa as a market and its minerals, Africa matters. Because there are only 4.5 million of us that came here as slaves, but 5 million Africans came here voluntarily since 1970. And we've all tended to multiply very rapidly and successfully. And the Africans that came here since 1970 are the 2nd most educated group of immigrants coming into the United States. And if you came here in 1970 with an education, you're doing damn well now. This economy allows people to flourish. People came from Ethiopia from a famine, but they worked hard, they were honest, they went to school. There are no poor Ethiopians anymore. There's a young lady that lives right across the street from here whose husband designed Georgia 400, and it's named for him, Harvey Mathis. Harvey Mathis. And Susan Mathis, when he died, decided that she was going to take her resources. Ironically, this lady who grew up spent almost all of her life in Buckhead, had visited every single African country. And when she retired and cashed in her husband's wealth, she built a 5- or 6-star resort in the northern part of South Africa, just across the river from the border from Gaborone, and on an area where there were about 70 people farming. She created jobs for 1,100 with a game park and a tourist place. Africa works. There's nobody I know in Africa that's not making money and making money proudly and honestly. We've got offices in our company in Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, Angola, Rwanda, Tanzania, and thanks to the Agency for International Development, we manage a nonprofit venture capital fund with AID. But Africa is ready to take off. One other thing, medicine. I went through a spice farm in Tanzania last week, 2 weeks ago. We had 500 people from the United States at the Leon Sullivan Summit, and 4,000 people showed up in Tanzania, and part of our trip was a visit through a spice farm. And the guy made the statement that there was a time that spices were more valuable than gold. And as we went through this garden, and he cut things, he told us the medicinal value and purpose of each of these herbs and how they at one time dominated the medicine and pharmaceutical markets of Europe and Asia. There are right now experiments going on with African herbology that relating it to our pharmaceuticals that have a medicinal hope for many of the diseases that we have found unconquerable. And so Africa is a place of hope. There's a book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. And it's very simple. You can sell more Tide in Nigeria than you can in Atlanta. Simply because, but you can't sell the giant economy size. You have to break it down into 1 Naira packages. And if you do that, you can sell all the Tide that you can make. But we thought that Africa wasn't ready for technology until they said maybe we could sell 4 or 5 million cell phones in Nigeria. The first year they sold 20 million. And the last time Coca-Cola was honest with me, they admitted to making 41 cents on a dollar on their African investments. That's why Africa matters.
Andy, we were secretly hoping that you'd be a little enthusiastic about the subject at hand this evening. Excuse me? Andy, we live in a matriarchal society, as you know, and you've been instructed to take a seat in the front home. Kathy Cox is the superintendent of schools in Atlanta. She served as 15 years as a high school social studies teacher, so she knows the subject well. She served 2 terms in the Georgia legislature. In 2002, she was elected to be superintendent of schools of the state. In 2006, she was reelected with the second highest voter count in the history of the state. She's committed to making Georgia schools the best, and I think she's well on that road. Superintendent Cox.
Oh, what a pleasure to be here tonight, and an honor to be with Ambassador Young. And I think I need to start tagging along, because as a social studies teacher, one of my dreams is to get to Africa, and I haven't been able to get there yet. But that's a deal. I will go with and learn so much. And, you know, how appropriate for me as a state superintendent in my continual journey of learning to be able to come to the Southern Center tonight and learn even more about things about the world economy and how important Africa is. So the great thing about being an educator is we're always learning, and that's what I love about social studies. We can ignite students' learning. And nothing more important than igniting their excitement and their learning about other people and places and cultures around the world, as well as the economies. So I'm so privileged to be here tonight as a social studies teacher who taught world history. I wish I had had these materials myself. I got to tell you, in 1987, when I hit that world history classroom for the first time and realized that they were serious about world history, not just Western Civ, I realized, I don't know much about things other than Western Civ. Like most people my age, being brought up as a history person, and Western Civ, Western Civ. So the first time I had to teach Africa to those 10th graders, boy, I could have used these materials. I can tell you I probably wasn't that exciting because I was just probably a chapter ahead of them. If that, maybe just a couple of pages. But again, as a teacher, we continually learn. And like good teachers, when we know that we don't know as much as we need to know to be good teachers, we get to learning ourselves. And that's why these materials are so important, because as much has changed in education in 20 years since I started, there's still some things that remain the same. People, as hard as they work, are going to walk into a situation and not know as much as possibly they could or should about a topic in a subject area. And it's things like these Teach Africa materials that need to be in there to help fill those gaps and to help those teachers get over these periods and these places where they're not as familiar, they don't know as much, and give them the confidence to get in there and be as excited about what they're teaching because they feel like they do know something and they can relay that to teachers. Now, to students. Now, a lot has changed in 20 years, and I feel like through the work of the Southern Center and other places, and particularly with the African Society, and Bernadette, thank you so much for your dedication to this cause. I do believe that Georgia teachers are in a great position to continue to get kids excited about Africa. And whether it's the money-making opportunities, as have been so readily pointed out, or it's just the sheer cultural fascination with the continent. I think we stand ready to help our students. Now, some of you know we had a little problem in social studies education here just a few weeks ago. So I'm also excited to be here because the invitation to come and be a part of this event couldn't have come at a better time. And it came right about the time we were realizing that our 6th and 7th grade students didn't do so well on our new curriculum. And so I'm going to use this time to ask for your help. We have figured out what we think was the issue, and I share this with you, is that when we wrote this new Georgia Performance Standards in 6th and 7th grade world cultures, it's really social studies. We're trying to teach kids government, economics, history, and geography, integrated and hitting every region of the world so that 6th and 7th graders get that exposure and hopefully ignite a spark. And in our quest to do that and to be comprehensive, this is what I've described to people what happened. We wrote standards that would have covered the side of this notebook for every region of the world. And unfortunately, due to time constraints and the sheer capacity of what you can do in 1 year's time, our teachers got in and they taught probably about half or 3/4, or, you know, if you were lucky, of what we had said should cover those standards. And they did a great job. But unfortunately, the test came along, and if the teacher appeared to have taught over here, the test came along and asked a question over here. So technically, the standards and the test were aligned, but it wasn't aligned to what was really going on in the classroom. And that was the same problem we had with the old QCC. Remember, we had a list of topics a mile long, and there was no way you could cover what was expected to be taught. Unfortunately, we kind of did the same thing with this new Georgia Performance Standards. Now, the tough stuff is ahead, and this is where I need your help. We quickly convened a group of people from all over the state to come help us pare this down and get to what is it we really want kids to know and be able to do and tell us and be able to perform for us standards and tasks related to these. So we have to pare it down. And in social studies, as you know, it's a lot easier to keep adding than it is to decide what is it we really are going to teach and stand united behind that as the core. So we have attempted to put out a new draft of that Georgia Performance Standards on Africa and other places around the world too, that attempts to really get to the core essentials of what we want to introduce kids to in 6th and 7th grade. Now again, we can keep adding and adding, but the reality of every time we add something, the reality and the question, is that really going to get taught? So we need the help of the people around this room who are African experts, who have dealt with Africa in the past, the present, and look to the future, who understand the scholarly research but also understand the middle school mind, and who can help our teachers get a curriculum that's manageable but is exciting. Because what I hear from the voices of the people sitting in front of you and the people that I've met in this room, a real goal is for people to change their image of how we see Africa. And to do that, we've got to excite kids about the study of that continent and those people. And I think we can do it in Georgia as well or better than anywhere else in the nation if we can get this curriculum right. Because we've got the great materials ready to go in the hands of our teachers. Now, again, I caution us. We don't have to teach a 6th or 7th grader everything about Africa. We got to lay the foundation for them to build as they go through the rest of the social studies curriculum. But like so many things, when we want to get people excited about something, we attempt to cram it all in. They got to know this, and they got to know this, and they got to know this. So it's going to be tough, but I ask for your help. You can access this curriculum revision at gadoe.org. Our social studies people are here tonight. Would y'all stand? Chris, where's Bill? Bill, here's our 2 social studies heads that are going to help get this right. And you can submit your comments. We're going to have the GPS out for public comment for 60 days. So it just started a couple of weeks ago, so you still have plenty of time to get in and give us your comments about what we're going to attempt to do. But we really need your help. And again, I think that once we get this curriculum for the state of Georgia right, with the wonderful launching of materials and videos and the technology that we have to deliver this exciting stuff about Africa to our students, we will really see kids get excited about social studies and particularly about the continent of Africa. So thank you for having me here tonight as a teacher and especially a social studies teacher. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you, Kathy. To show you how, I'll give you an illustration of how things have changed in Georgia in 20 years. We have one of our World in Transition packages dealing with Africa. We have a letter in the back of the room from Kofi Annan saying basically these materials are so good they should be used in Africa to teach Africans about Africa, and they were done in Georgia by Georgians. So we have some expertise right here in the state in our various universities and classrooms. I'd like to now introduce Helene Gayle, Dr. Helene Gayle, the President CEO of CARE, probably one of the best international aid organizations in the world, active in some 60 countries. Dr. Gayle has had a distinguished career. She spent 20 years at the Communicable Disease Center, where she was in charge, among other things, of the TB HIV program. People don't realize it, but the Public Health Service, if I have this right, Helene, classify their senior officers in naval rank. So she actually had the rank of admiral when she retired. I don't know many lady admirals, but I know one now, and so do you. After leaving the CDC, she took a hardship assignment, one that put her deeply undercover. She went out to the West Coast and became the advisor to the Gates Foundation on HIV and TB. She's defected from that position after 2 years and reluctantly took a position at CARE, where she now serves, as I said. So, Helene, if you could give us a few words.
Thank you. And I'm going to be very brief because I know we want to have a question and answer period, and a lot of the things that I would have said, others have said very, very eloquently. But let me just say a little bit from the perspective of an international organization that is focused on eliminating extreme poverty. Our focus as an organization is trying to make a difference for those people who are living on less than $1 a day, or the half of our population that lives on less than $2 a day, and really trying to make long-lasting change in those communities. And so for us, because Africa is disproportionately impacted by poverty, a focus on Africa is clearly a priority for us. We work in over 30 countries in Africa and have been involved in programs in Africa since the mid-50s in a variety of different ways. As a lot of organizations like ours, we have moved from trying to provide services. We still provide services to people, particularly in emergency situations, but increasingly what our work is focused on is how do we help build capacity at the community level so that people are in the best position to make long-lasting, sustainable change for themselves. And so we have kind of, in the parable of fishing, we have moved from an organization that gives a person a fish to an organization that helps people learn to fish, and now really increasingly looking at why are there no fish in the stream to begin with, and what are the things that we need to help people and communities so that they have the wherewithal not only to meet their immediate needs, but to also look at the underlying causes of poverty, the underlying causes like marginalization and stigmatization, poor governance, corruption, lack of accountability, and all of those sorts of things that really are at the root of why some countries as well as some communities stayed mired in extreme poverty. One of the things that I think is wonderful about what I get to do is that I not only I'm faced with the incredible challenges, and I think there's no question there still remains incredible challenges today, and we have things coming on the horizon like the increasing food crisis and the crisis that we're facing, or the impact that climate change is going to have on poor communities that are really going to bear the brunt. While we talk about our own issues here and in Georgia, where we know we've gone through facing our own situation with drought, the realities of climate change are really going to be hardest on people in poor countries. So while there are lots of challenges, and those are the kinds of things that we face, increasing emergencies like the cyclone that we're dealing with in Myanmar, or the floods and drought and cyclones that we're seeing in coastal Africa. All those things are challenges. But I think for us, what we also have the opportunity to see are the real hope and the real changes that are happening at the community level. And so whether it is going to populations in Rwanda who just over 10 years ago were faced, were head-to-head in conflict and animosity, to see those communities that are now working side by side, building a new and harmonious society, or whether I look at some of our programs in micro-lending, where we're seeing that women, and particularly women, but communities in general, are getting an opportunity to start businesses and change, and that start a kind of a virtuous cycle. Once they can start businesses, they send their children to school. Once they send their children to school, they recognize that it's important to invest in their health. Once they invest in their health, they understand that it's important to have access to clean water and latrines that help to maintain health. So wherever you enter into the cycle of change, we see that communities are able to change and make long-lasting, sustainable change within communities. And that's exciting for me, because while we often look at the news and hear the doom and gloom around what's going on in Africa, and there's still a long way to go, we're seeing those things at the macro level. But when we look at the community level, we know that change is occurring, and that change at a cumulative over time is what's going to ultimately have a huge impact on changing the face of Africa and changing the face of the continent overall. You know, I would just say and add to some of the things that Ambassador Young said, that I think it is important for us. Clearly for us as an organization that's committed to ending global poverty, we feel like we cannot afford to let the potential that lies in Africa be left on the cutting floor. And so, you know, if we're looking at what does it take to build a better, more peaceful society, it does take, and it does include Africa. But it's also important to remember that there is increasing strategic interest, whether it's our oil interest, whether it is in the interest of peace and security, and concerns about the disparities that are occurring that lead to the roots of terrorism within Africa and around the world, or whether it is being able to have a greater and more equitable fair trade system that takes Africa into a global economy and helps all of us build a better and safer and stronger economy. It is going to take Africa. So I would agree with all the comments that people have said that we cannot move ahead as a world community if we don't also move ahead as a community that cares about Africa and believes in the future of Africa. So I'm just, as I said, feel very fortunate to be part of an organization that's helping, hopefully, to make some of that change happen and to be able to see that as by a person-to-person, community-to-community, recognize that change is occurring, that Africans, when given the tools and given the hope, are making the kinds of changes that will be long-lasting, and that by investing in those communities, and particularly by investing in women and girls, which we have made a huge priority for our organization, we know that we have the best chance of having long-lasting, sustainable change in Africa, and ultimately a better, safer, more peaceful world overall. So I look forward to our question and answer, but just pleased to be part of this and really thrilled to hear more about Teach Africa. I showed up because I show up if Peter asked me to do something, and if I know that Ambassador Young is going to be there and Julia and Cedric, you know, I just show up. But I'm very pleased to be here because learning about Teach Africa and learning about the potential of really shifting the image of Africa here in this country, shifting the way students think about Africa, I think it really does bring part of what I think will be very hopeful in a world where we already know our students are more global, are more caring, do understand how important it is to be part of the global economy and the global world, and I think that putting Africa in the center of it is key to that. So thank you.
Admiral Gale, thank you very much for those remarks. John Donaldson is listed on your program as the Acting Director of International Affairs at the World Bank. In reality, during the 13 years that he spent in that institution, he has spent 4 years working on African communications. So he's not unfamiliar with Africa, its problems, and its opportunities. He's also in charge of offices not only in the United States, Washington, New York, but also in Asia and Europe. So when it comes to external communications with the donor nations, John is the man, and we're lucky to have him here with us tonight. John, please.
So I'm really happy to be here myself, and I'm not going to, every time I think of somebody getting up from the World Bank myself and talking, I start to cringe, so so I'll try to be brief. Like Helene, I look forward to a few questions afterwards. I have to say that I'm a product of the Georgia public school system. I graduated in the first graduating class in North Springs High School. So, and I have to make just a personal comment that growing up, being a child of the '60s in Atlanta, we got quite an education. And not least of which because of Martin Luther King and Andrew Young and others who basically taught us that the moral imperative to speak truth to power. And most of us have grown up with that as a moral compass. So I just want to thank him once again. I've thanked him before, but I want to thank him publicly. And in Helene Gale, you know, I think CARE is being modest. If anything, Helene's being modest. CARE has come along in the time I've followed CARE from being basically a relief organization to being basically one of our primary partners in development in Africa and other places. In many cases, they take the lead because they're the best party to be delivering the services on the ground, and we're happy to partner with them whenever we can. I'd just like to say there's a guy who was poet and first president of Senegal, who was Leopold Senghor, who said that paradise is an African sunrise. And I'd have to say that, you know, there are plenty of Africans here who can say, I've been to Africa many times, and I think that's the best way to describe Africa. And not just because it's a beautiful line, but because it really talks about the real Africa, the Africa that those of us who have been there know exists. The needs of Africa are, I think, best known to everybody. And I think that's how we get engaged on Africa, is because of the needs. But we get, I think, really we get fully engaged with Africa because of its potential. Once you get past the need, it draws you in with the potential. And if you're really lucky, you fall in love with Africa, but you fall in love with it because of its strengths. And I think that's important to note too, that the picture that most Americans have of Africa is similar to if you thought that the picture that most people have of America is drawn from the TV show Dallas, or maybe The Simpsons. It's a caricature, and I think beyond the challenge we have to provide a good educational basis for kids in school, we have to educate people who write about Africa, because whenever there's one of the traditional failures of Africa, it's on the front page. I mean, people are reading about Zimbabwe today, but they're not reading about the progress that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is making in Liberia to turn the country around after 2 decades of civil war, where the infrastructure was in ruins, where they had no working electricity in the country and not a single landline telephone that worked. And in 18 months, she's given that country a reason to hope for a much better future. This is what the World Bank is engaged in Africa, is to work with countries to help them reach the potential that already exists. Today, in factories in Africa, what they make is competitive with anything made in the world at the factory floor. The impediments they face are infrastructural problems, reliable power, the ability to get their goods to market, to get them across, to have reliable trade agreements within Africa so they can trade across boundaries, and to have a level playing field in the global economy to be able to compete effectively. When they passed the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, you saw a little bit of what the potential could be if you create a level playing field for Africans' goods and services. Africans are inventive. Basically, I came to North Springs High School when I came back for a reunion. Actually, I got introduced to a student who was graduating that year, and I took him, he was walking me back to the room, and I mentioned that I graduated in the first graduating class at North Springs. And he looked at me, and I thought he was going to have one of these cross-generational bonding things, but he looked at me and says, "I didn't realize the building was that old." So we have more than just Africa to educate the students, but I was able to say that at least when I went to North Springs, we won football games. So, I think that most of what I would say has already been said by people. I just want to say that the reason that I work for the World Bank and the reason that we work in Africa is not because we're trying to teach Africans how to do what they need to do to survive or to prosper. They already know how to do that. Africans, in my opinion, are the most inventive, ingenious people. We do polling all the time, and Africans are the most optimistic people in the world. They believe that they are better off today than they were 5 years ago. They believe that the future is prosperous for them. They believe that their children will lead a better life than they've led. By far, they have these opinions more than anybody else in the world. They take insurmountable challenges and find ways around them. Without electricity, they find other ways to do it. If there's a problem with the fact that they don't have a sound regulatory structure in their countries, the informal sector thrives. Africans just will not accept anything other than forward progress. And it's just our job to give them the tools they need to do the job they already know how to do. So it's been a humbling experience working in Africa, and I think that some of the best people I've ever met are Africans, and I think that if you're looking for, Kathy, if you're looking for people to speak to the students directly, there are plenty of Africans that live in the Atlanta area, and I've never met an African that didn't want to talk about his country. He'll tell you everything, he or she will tell you everything right about it, everything wrong about it, and you know, who won the last football game. So I'm going to stop there. I would recommend the book by Paul Collier to people. I think that there's a couple of books that anybody graduating from high school should read before they graduate. And Paul Collier has just written a book called The Bottom Billion. And The Bottom Billion, and it's about basically the billion people that Helene was mentioning live on $1 a day. And, you know, he's an economist, which my math teacher, Mrs. McDaniel, would tell you I'm not an economist, and she'd have to have me say that I wasn't her prize student. But he writes in a language that doesn't speak to it as an economist. So I think that book, and of course, I still like The World is Flat by Tom Friedman. I think that talks about understanding better a global society in which all of us, including Africans, have to compete. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, well, I think I have to say something for two reasons. One, the only physically represented Consul General from Africa here in Atlanta. Two, as you may be aware, out of every 5 Africans you meet, at least one must be a Nigerian. With a population of more than 140 million people, it says what it means. First of all, let me thank the Southern Society and the African group for putting this program, because after 1 year and 4 months here, this is about the best audience and program I have been to. Now let me say that wonderful resource persons you have here, I mean, you can't beat it. A lot of things they have said here, just in encapsulation. In Davos, Switzerland, December 2006, when world leaders met, one of the issues there was Africa. What is going on? Why is Africa being presented in such bad light? I remember from the West, we had people like former Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair. We had the great philanthropist, Bono, and from Africa, Thabo Mbeki, and leaders from all over the world. And we think there is no way Africans have to tell their own story. There is no alternative about it. About 2 months ago here, that was in Athens, UGA, the 5 secretaries of state here met under the auspices of what the Southern Center also presented. And I remember it was former Secretary of State Colin Powell who said that as the only remaining superpower, America has no choice than to broaden its education program to enable the children learn about the world. They were discussing Iraq before it becomes too late. And I think that is the essence of what is being done here. After 1 year and 4 months, after my travels, meeting and giving lectures from the universities to students in the middle college, what I have realized is a very serious yawning gap. Not only at the public sector levels, also at the organized private sector levels, that most Americans don't know about Africa, except what they see from the television, what they see from the newspapers, and of course they thrive on sensationalism, which is not right. So, but the only way out is what you are doing here this evening, which I think is very good, to let the people have balanced information and the truth about a people, because Africa is not a geographical expression. Africa is a continent of 53 independent countries, out of which you have maybe about 5 or highest 6 with some problems, crises, you say in Sudan, in Zimbabwe, and so on. The truth of the matter is that there are so many African countries doing very well. I mean, if you tell an average American today that Nigeria supplies more than 15% of the gas needs in the United States, it's very surprising, even among university professors, because most of them are not aware of this reality. So I think if you now think of children from the elementary, secondary school level, it's important to let them understand. If you say, look, Nigeria is the 15th largest trading partner of the United States, do you know a Nigerian is a vice president in the World Bank? Do you know a Nigerian is a managing director in World Bank? Some of them don't know. The fastest computer running unit here in the 20th century was developed by a Nigerian in the United States, Professor Magwali. The record is there. So I think it's very important. What you are doing this night is wonderful, because people will think that Africa is just a basket case, begging with that is not the case. And given the tremendous economic, historical, and cultural links between Africa and the United States of America, it's very good that a center, a research institute like this should provide people with a balanced information about Africa, because our relationship is so robust and wonderful that this information, cross-pollination of ideas, is very good. And what the World Bank and other organizations are doing to help crisis ridding or war or disease this in Africa, that is what friendship should be all about. So I'm very happy to be here today, but I am very serious if I say today that Africa is the richest continent on earth as far as natural resources are concerned. That is a reality, although it may still be underground. So let us have more of this interaction to better inform our friends all over the world, and I think in this way we can do better. Thank you very much. Question and answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Consul General. We're honored to have you. The Consul General is the last, not the last, but just the most current of a long line of distinguished representatives of this country. Started with Moses Ahende, Andrew, when you welcomed the first Consul General 20 years ago. Now we're going to get to the most perhaps exciting part of the program, most dangerous for the speakers. We're going to have some questions. Now, one of the things we'd like to ask you to do is when I identify you, if you could stand, ask a very brief question, but precede that with identifying yourself by name and organization. So if you have a question, we're ready to acknowledge your presence. Yes, Judge B. Oh, wait, this gentleman here is, I'm sorry. Ladies first, sorry. And she's a judge, so we may face her professionally one of these days. Okay.
Good evening. I'm Steve Cogman. I'm here this evening representing ICRIS, which is a nonprofit art co-op founded in California, and we're establishing offices here in Atlanta. I have a question for Dr. Gale. I've been an epidemiologist for almost 3 decades, so I'm a great fan of Dr. Gale. And I work with art communities and with faith-based organizations, and I'm quite interested in the role of art co-op in enabling people, empowering them to make a living, to care for their families, and to survive. We work with faith-based, community-based organizations in rural Zimbabwe, in Bari, different parts of South Africa, Mexico, and here in the United States. And I was struck by your comments about giving people fish and teaching them how to fish and so forth. And we like to think that everyone has artistic inclinations, artistic ability, and even people who are struggling, people who are impoverished, like to do arts and crafts. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts about potential connection between the public health and humanitarian relief sector and arts communities, art co-ops.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said it all. I mean, I think that there is a lot to be said for using the arts as a vehicle in a variety of ways. And so I'd like to be happy to talk to you a little bit about ways that we might be able to, I think, besides the fact that art can just be a wonderful vehicle for people to express themselves, I think it also can be a way of livelihood. We see in a lot of the communities that we work with, people using art as a basis for entrepreneurship. And so, I think art can be an incredible vehicle for personal as well as community empowerment in a variety of ways. So, thank you.
Judge Beasley?
I was on the Board of Trustees of the Southern Center until recently, and I am one of the students. You are teachers, I'm a student. I just graduated from Emory Law School, and I'm a senior judge at the state of Georgia. My question, lifetime learning. I'll count us out. I am very puzzled because one of the things we studied, and I'm quite familiar with, is the International Criminal Court, the first permanent criminal court in the world that has jurisdiction over war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. There are only 4 situations before the court from its beginning until now. They all arise in Africa. Are we picking on Africa, or is there some unique thing happening there that needs the attention of the whole world as it relates to those horrific types of crimes? That's John Donaldson first.
Thanks, Dorothy. Perhaps you could paraphrase the question for those who may have had a difficulty in hearing it.
I think the question really relates to the fact that the International Court in The Hague has four situations that they're investigating, all of which are based from Africa, and whether that means that they were picking on Africa or whether there's something else. I think it speaks, actually, I meant to mention this, so I'm going to work it into the answer. I think that you really have to acknowledge that there's a new generation of leaders in Africa. In 1989, there were 4 countries that institutions classified as full democracies. There are now more than almost 20. I think that the increase in democratic role and transparency and good governance that is growing not from being imposed from outside, but growing through the leadership in Africa and with the support of African organizations like the African Union, is helping to identify some problems from the past and deal with them. I don't know all 4 of the specific cases, but I know a couple of them, and I think it falls into this category that you have situations where you have past abuses and you have current leaders who are dealing with that. Just like the World Bank is dealing with corruption. We didn't used to consider corruption something that was our concern, and we had this sort of misguided view that we were above corruption, that somehow we knew where all our money was going. And when Jim Wolfenson in 1995 said, we're going to attack this as the cancer of corruption and how it is an economic force, you have to be prepared to find corruption if you're going to go looking for it. And it's been a very humbling experience for us over the past, 12, 13 years to actually find corruption, see our part in it, and identify it. And I think this is what the African leaders are doing. They're dealing with problems of the past. They're putting in institutions to be more responsible and responsive leaders, and they're moving on. So I see this as a positive thing.
Ambassador Young would like to make a further comment.
And I don't want to discuss it or argue it, but I just want to state a problem for me. And that is that we gave complete amnesty to all of the whites in South Africa. Ian Smith lived peacefully in Harare, and he was the only person that I visited that had no guards on his door. There has been a willingness on the part of Africans to forgive white people, but there has not been a willingness to extend amnesty in African situations. I'm not sure whether that's, I'm not trying to make a moral judgment. I'm simply saying that I think Africa was better off letting Idi Amin go to Saudi Arabia and die in anonymity than taking Charles Taylor from, they both were despicable, but it's costing the UN $1 billion to try the war criminals from Rwanda in Arusha. it's a Western standard court. I'm not sure that that's the way I want to spend the money. And then when they are convicted, 31 out of 45 have been convicted. But what do you do with them? They were all given life sentences, but where do you put them and who wants them? One more thing. One of the problems in settling Darfur, one of the problems in retiring Robert Mugabe, is if the World Court is going to come get me, why quit? And every one of the people in Darfur, every one of the tribal factions is guilty of war crimes. The Lord's Resistance Army is a filthy, despicable organization. I think the only way to end some of those things is to hold your nose and give them some amnesty and try to move on.
Yes, sir.
My name is Dr. Ayuk, and I'm the Assistant Professor of Political Science, Clayton State University. I teach African politics, and I want to thank the regents of the University System of Georgia, particularly the African Council. But last semester I taught African politics, and believe me, so many of the students were not aware of Africa. In fact, I started off giving the students a map of Africa for them to identify African countries, and we do not want to know the results. But guess what? Clayton State University, in partnership with the University System of Georgia, they have the study abroad program. And after the African politics class, 16 students have signed on to go to South Africa. We will be traveling to South Africa on the 7th of July for 1 month. And we believe very strongly that this initiative should not only stay at the university level. There should be a partnership between the university as well as the high school, because the ignorance begins at the high school level. And so, representing short, I want to thank you very, very much, and I hope we can try as much as possible to get students at the high school level. From a personal standpoint, I go to various high schools as a soccer player, former national soccer player from Cameroon in West Africa. I talk to the students, I help the students in various schools about soccer, and of course, they ask so many questions. Is it true that people in Africa sleep on trees? It's through this conversation that a lot of the students learn a little bit more.
I wonder if you could get to a question.
And so, Mr. Donaldson, please, your view about structural adjustment and its impact in Africa.
This is an issue that the bank has been wrestling with recently. I think that you would be happy to hear that structural adjustment is really not something we're doing anymore. And it's partly because we try to learn lessons and we try not to make the same mistakes. Structural adjustment in theory is basically just trying to arrive at an arrangement or an agreement with a country on how to use the resources, to have a macroeconomic basis or a framework in which projects can be viewed working towards a goal. But in reality, structural adjustment turned out to be too rigid for the sort of flexibility that was necessary for development to progress. You can look at projects in the 80s and 90s, and we can say, how did we manage to do those things? And we can say, with the best of intentions, but they didn't work, so we're not doing them anymore. And I think that in the case of structural adjustment, we've learned that that it's probably not the best approach. We've also learned that we need to work with the country more in the driver's seat. So we work with countries to come up with their own plan that we try to support, so that it doesn't look like we're trying to impose our programs on them. So we've learned over the time. I mean, structural adjustment is one of those terms that gets thrown up, and I don't have a good answer for what we did in the past. All I can say is we're not doing it anymore.
I think the professor would be stunned to know that Secretary Cox and her colleagues at the Department of Education are not satisfied with introducing Africa into the high school level. That's too late in their opinion. They've gone to the 6th grade. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Gail King, and I direct the Forum Public Doctor Village's humanitarian medical aid program. But in my previous life, I was 25 years as an educator. My question is, how do you take the Teach Africa curriculum and merge it into the state standards, that, so that, they work together?
That's an excellent question. We're starting with Teach Africa, and we're giving them the curriculum from the Southern Center for International Studies, and they meet some state standards in different schools. But we have to have really a lobbying entity in place once we have the materials. The boards of education, as you know, have to adopt this, and this, Leave No Child Behind has left a lot of information behind, and people are teaching tests. So that's not a political statement, it just happens to be true. So what we're hoping is that we're going to merge what we already have with state-of-the-art technology through discovery and try to come out with something that we can work with the Department of Education and push out throughout the country. And then we have to have, and that's why we're doing this, we have to have people positioned, just like with the National Summit, Ambassador Young, to make sure it gets on the school board agenda.
Superintendent Cox.
Well, the difference, I think, between what we've had before, which is generally kind of a list of topics, and what the Georgia Performance Standards are, there's just a huge difference. This is not a list of topics that things that teachers have to cover. These are very specific objectives and learning that we have said this is essentially what a 6th grader needs to know and be able to do as it relates to social studies. And in this case, Africa and other regions around the world. They're performance tasks. And quite frankly, any resource that's out there that is content-driven and content-oriented and performance-driven, so that we can get kids not just sitting and listening about Africa or watching a video on Africa, but actually doing things that are related to Africa. These materials we integrate right in. We write performance tasks that then the students will be able to meet the learning objective, be able to demonstrate the learning objective through a task where we use these great materials. So we're extremely excited. We're in this age, and particularly in the digital age, this isn't about finding the perfect textbook to put in the hands of a student and say, read chapter 1 through 4. This is about teachers using this digital age and this information age to find the best materials in the world about the topics and about the standards, and bringing those into that classroom and getting the kids to use them. And they won't use them for everything. There'll be much more there probably than we can get to in 6th and 7th grade, but particularly 6th grade. But it's that quality that we're looking for that can make sure that those teachers and students are getting the best information to use. So we're very excited about this. Our teachers need it. Correct, teachers?
We have time for one more question. This lady at the very end, please.
I'm just a simple educator. I'm not anyone so-called important, but I'm from Muhammad Schools. My name is Nadia Abdulrahman, and I am a world history teacher. And I have to say that my students are very familiar with African history, and that's been through my efforts. But they said to me when school closed, there's such a thing as the fatigue of dialogue, Sister Nadia. And what can we do, what can American students do to exchange with African students, or can we develop a virtual global classroom using the technology? So my question to you is, please tell us, how can they do some hands-on things? They learn better that way, and it's very real for them that way. So we, anything, and then I will be calling you these esteemed panelists to come visit my class.
Is that visit to be virtual or in person? Do you have an answer for that?
I want to answer to stand for this one because I get so excited when I think about the potential of virtual learning, especially as a social studies teacher. When I go into classrooms today and I see teachers with that computer and those students, and they're just accessing information and pictures and real-time information. I mean, it's just incredible. You know, I was up there 20 years ago getting the library books out and, you know, holding up, okay, here's David, yeah, you know, or because it was Westminster, you know, or, but then also you held up the things, and you didn't have the artifacts, and you didn't have the thing, and the technology is incredible. And we're so fortunate in Georgia, in the public schools, to have had a commitment towards all of this computer. We were one of 3 states that got an A- for our use of technology in the classroom. Just one of 3. You always hear about where we're always, you know, lagging behind, where we were an A-. So we have just tremendous potential. And what we've got to have, again, are materials and people that can get this spark going. And sometimes it's going to be used on the computer because that's how kids relate, but then we also have to do, and you're sitting next to the art and history folks. Listen, I have never seen this stuff. This is amazing. They've got kids all over. I saw it in one place in Georgia where kids are actually creating artwork around the traditional arts found across the regions all over the world. And they're doing it in social studies classes. They're not doing it in art class. They're doing it in the history class, and they're able to put their hands to it and make something of meaning so that they remember the history, they remember the culture. And I just don't think we even understand yet what a classroom is going to look like in 10 years from now with the digital age and computer technology. I just don't think anybody in this room can even imagine what we're going to be able to do.
And the possibility that represents for our students.
Absolutely. I mean, the possibilities are just endless. And I think that you're going to see much more of an effort to do true world education, real, true international education. And it's not just going to be learning about. I believe with computer technology and the internet and all of this access to information and to people, we're going to be learning with our international counterparts. And that just is so exciting as a social studies teacher. So I look forward to working more with you and with all the people in this room to make that happen. And I have to say this, she poo-pooed No Child Left Behind. Last thing I want to say, and I said this to my social studies teachers over here who sometimes feel like, when are they going to start testing for real in social studies? I said, believe me, you don't want that. In terms of accountability. But what I want to say is, just because you have a focus and you take a picture and you're making a panoramic picture, which education, particularly middle grades education, should be a panoramic picture. We should be educating the whole child. Okay, so it's like taking a big landscape picture. You still have to focus the camera to get a good picture. But just because you focus the camera doesn't mean you cut everything else out. So you can have a school that focuses on reading. You can have a school that has to focus on that. But that doesn't mean the social studies, the science, the PE, the art, the music isn't a big part of that picture. And so we've got to stop thinking it's this or that. It's everything, and we can use social studies, and we can use the study of Africa to make it all incredibly exciting. So that was my little spiel about we can do it all. Okay.
Well, as so often is true in life, the last word on that question is given to a banker. John Donaldson, if you'd like to.
I'd add a point on this, because I think in this regard we might be able to help. And I can bring up an idea that actually Jim Wolfenson had some time ago when he was president of the World Bank. I mean, we have 40 offices in Africa, and each one of them has video conferencing facilities. And if you can work out something at this end, that we could probably make our video facilities available for some kind of structured exchange if we bring the students into our office.
Well, Bernadette and Andy?
Yeah, Morehouse last month had a video conference with, I guess it was high school students from Atlanta, with high school students from South Africa, Kenya, and China, I think, at the same, or India at the same time, in the leadership center there at Morehouse.
Well, Bernadette and Gail, I think you can report to our sponsors at USAID and to your own organizations, the Discovery Channel, and to the Africa Society, that what you've done here is you've lit the fuse. I shudder to think what the final explosion will be like. I think it'll be thermonuclear, not conventional. So you're a couple of weapons of mass destruction here tonight, and I want to thank you very much for all the things you've done.
To the gentleman who made the point about maps, you all get a bag of gifts when you leave, including a map and a book from John Reeder from Random House and a book from the Council on Foreign Relations that they're sending all over. And I just want to say this. You know, in order for us to get where we're going, you have to have people like Ambassador Young, Dr. Herschel Chaloner, Dr. Gale, John, and all of you. There are other honorary councils here who weren't named. Vince Farley, the Honorary Council of Liberia, was here also. To the teacher who so eloquently talked about her students and exposure, you know, when I fell in love with Africa was in Kenya when the Congress sent me in 1985, a long time ago, for the UN Decade for Women. And I fell in love with Africa because of Africans. In Atlanta, there are a lot of Africans, a lot of African communities who can walk into that classroom and ignite the imagination of those students more than anyone else, in addition to all the technology. And with respect to technology, the Congress, I went on a telecommunications study to Africa. They said Africa was hopeless because they had so many telephone lines per population, and then came the cell phone. And you can get better cell phone service, isn't it true, Ambassador Young, in Africa than in the United States? And so I'm saying that to say that soon, through technology, all of the African youth are going to be able to come up to speed, and youth throughout the developing world. And my last point is, you talked about the young person who asked you something bizarre question about Africa. I brought all these beautiful, highly intelligent young people who work in our office from different African countries to a grade school in Washington, D.C. And I asked them for questions. And Philip was there. And one young man lifted his hand. This was in a gifted program. And he said, "How do all you keep from animals eating you in Africa?" And one of our young people said, "You probably have a better chance of animals eating you in the United States." So there is a need. You know, and there is a need for Africa. And when that same student said, "Well, what has Africa ever done?" I don't know about Africa. I said, "Well, do you eat chocolate?" Yes. Well, 90% of the cocoa comes from Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. So if you make linkages like gold, coffee, Starbucks, they start to understand the significance of Africa. So thank you all of you, for being such a receptive audience. It's been a rich discussion, and I'm so very grateful, as I know Gail is.